Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today I'm going to be doing my breakdown of the 4 games on Thursday for the Sweet 16. It is currently Wednesday, so do keep that in mind, but this slate is pretty interesting. We have some really good games here. All these games are in between 130 and 145 points, with the Tennessee-Florida Atlantic game being the lowest scoring slate game, and the Gonzaga-UCLA game being the highest scoring one. I'm going to go through my team picks, or my top picks here, and then I will do a breakdown of individual teams. We're going to start off, though, looking at the players. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot, and I really do appreciate it. With that said, let's go ahead and get into this slate. We have some good options, I think. These are going to be my top plays of the day here that I'm putting in the roster here right now, and I have 6 of those guys. And then I also have a couple value plays to talk to you about as well at the end of this part. So we're going to start with Muscovy of Tennessee at $7,500. If you remove the game versus U of L Lafayette, he has been really good fantasy-wise since Ziegler got hurt. And he's been over 27 fantasy points in every single game. In fact, only one game was under 30 fantasy points, which was the Missouri game in the SEC tournament. So I look for him to have another really solid game here against FAU. I don't expect him to have the same kind of game that he had against U of L Lafayette. So he's got some really good upside here. His price has also come down slightly from where it had been at the start of the tournament, so I look for him to be in a good spot here, and he's going to have plenty of usage and shot attempts, I think, in this game. And I really don't expect FAU to have too much issue, or be able to stop him, rather. Then we're going to look at Andre Jackson for Connecticut. And if he can stay out of foul trouble here, he's got a really good opportunity to have a good game. He's really played well throughout at this part of the season. His price has also come back down a little bit from where it had been a few games ago, but mostly because he had a bad game against Marquette. But he's had foul trouble sometimes, which has limited his fantasy output. But he's got a pretty tough matchup here against Arkansas. But he's playing well, and I think he's in a really good spot. Just a little concerned about the foul trouble, but he has upside regardless. And he's also a pretty good assist and rebounder guy, so he definitely gets peripheral stats, and he doesn't have to score a ton of real points to get there. However, he has been scoring around 8 to 10 points for a while, and so as long as he can continue to do that, then he definitely looks like a great option here. Then we're going to look at Tristan Newton here for Connecticut as well. Now, he also has some really good upside here, and he seems like one of the best priced guards on the slate. I think he is definitely a core play. He's played really good minutes, and he has nice upside, so I think he's in a great spot. Obviously, he plays around 30 minutes most of the time. He's been 27 to 30 the last few games. He's not a huge scoring guy sometimes, but even still, he does get assists and rebounds as well, so he has some utility here. But he's a little bit better scorer than Jackson is, who I just mentioned, and they're both priced around the same, so you could kind of mix and match those guys however you see fit. As for forwards, I'm going to look at Drew Timme as my top option at this position. He does seem like he's priced really well here. He's come down quite a bit in price, but that's also because he has a little bit of an inconsistency throughout, but he does, rebound decently well and get some assists as well, and he does score a lot sometimes. And this is a matchup where he's going to have to score a lot to keep them in the game. That's kind of the risk here, is if you think that Gonzaga can keep tight with UCLA, they will be one of the tougher defensive teams that they've faced all season long, and so that's kind of. And I've felt like UConn was a team that, UCLA was a team that could make a pretty deep run, and I don't know that Gonzaga necessarily will be able to keep up with them, but if they can, then Timme will definitely be a reason why, and he will have some nice upside as a result. As for Connecticut, Adama Sinago, excuse me for butchering your name a little bit. He has some really good upside here. He might be a little bit overpriced for the matchup, but he does feel good for this matchup as he has 5x potential here. And he's been over 19 fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he is rebounding well, or 19 real points rather, not fantasy points, in 3 straight games. And he's been rebounding really well too. I really think he has some good upside here. He is a little bit streaky throughout the season, but he does have big time upside here, and he's one of the few guys that you can legitimately feel like he can 5x on this particular slate. And then finally, Joey Hauser for Michigan State. It seems like Michigan State is going to go about as far as he can take them, and he's pretty priced fairly. He's been priced fairly throughout the tournament so far, and these games have been relatively tight, but he does shoot the ball, excuse me, pretty well and rebounds well. And as long as he does that in this game, which I think he'll be able to do, he should be able to do. He should be able to pay off at this price. He seems like he's priced very good on the slate. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate as well. So I think both him and Sanago are both priced decently well for the slate. As for my value plays, we're going to take a look at Bolton for Gonzaga first at $4,600. Now, I have to say I don't love any of the value plays, but I do think these are the best ones. He has only had a few games under 10 fantasy points all season long, and he does have a couple of 30 fantasy point games uh, throughout the season. Plus, he's had a couple good games lately, and he has 5x potential here. He's one of the better fantasy guys on this particular slate. Now, the catch here is that he's a little bit risky, and if Gonzaga doesn't play well, then he would not be that great, but he does feel like one of the better value plays that there are. As for his teammate Malachi Smith, he is the other guy that I think has some good upside here. Obviously, Gonzaga has to play well in this game for those guys to really pay off fantasy-wise, and Smith is a little bit more risky than Bolton, but he's not only had a handful of bad games throughout the season, he's priced low enough. His prices come down. His price is low enough that he can have some utility, regardless if he only gets 10 or 12 fantasy points. He won't destroy your lineup, but he is a way to help you fit in some of the other options. There's a couple other guys I think in that range that also seem okay when it comes to Tennessee. Tyreek Key, also Kansas State have a couple guys, Cam Carter and Gaffney for FAU, as well as Greenlee for FAU if you really want to push the buttons. But overall, I don't think there's a ton of value plays that are particularly great on the slate. But you'll probably have to find a couple, and I think that the guys from Gonzaga or Kansas State would be the best options. So, with that said, let's get into my team breakdowns. We're going to start with Michigan State here. They are favored to win this game by 1 point, and they have 137 total points, which is second lowest on the slate. Though Joey Hauser looks like a near must play at this price, he's definitely played well thus far in the tournament, and Kansas State really doesn't have the defense to stop him. I think he will also shoot the ball very well, and everyone else seems somewhat overpriced for their team. So Cisco has propped up in price, which is kind of a disappointment because he's been a fun value play so far in the tournament. But overall, I think Hauser is really the only guy that you really want to put too much bank on. As for Kansas State, they are projected to lose this game, and they aren't favored to score over 70 points, which is a little bit disappointing here. But if you think that Noel can do what he did against Kentucky against Michigan State, then he'd definitely be somebody to take in consideration. Even Johnson is a little bit overpriced, but he definitely has some utility. But I don't think that he's a must-play by any stretch of the imagination. But he is a kind of a secondary or third string play, maybe. And some of the other guys, like Cam Carter and Nagusin, also have some. Sorry for butchering your name, though, but they do have some value utility, but they are risky, especially in a slower matchup, unlike the Kentucky game that was fast-paced. Then we're going to look at Arkansas and Connecticut, and for Connecticut, they have there's a lot to like here. Being one of the three teams that's projected over 70 points on the slate, it does feel like most of their players are fairly straight scoring. They have fairly good pricing. I don't think that they really have any good value plays, but they do have some good core plays with Jackson and Newton and even Sanago. I could also look at Klinghan as somebody that's interesting, though he just doesn't play enough minutes to really be super exciting. But overall, I think UConn is definitely a team to consider, despite the fact they're in a tough matchup against Arkansas. As for Arkansas, they aren't favored to win this game, but I do think they have a good chance to win this game, despite that. I want to like Davis and Walsh, but they do seem a little bit overpriced. I wish they were about $500 cheaper to give them some utility here. Everyone else seems really overpriced, and this is going to be a tougher matchup, I think, than some people think. UConn is playing really well, but Arkansas is too. There would be some more upside if Black gets ruled out, but I honestly don't think he will be ruled out. But even whether he plays or not could really make a difference in how this game goes, and so we'll have to wait and see on that information. As for the Tennessee and Florida Atlantic game, Tennessee is favored by 6, which is the highest spread in the slate. Vescovi has a lot of upside here. He's played extremely well due to injuries lately, and the rest of the team does seem somewhat streaky and overpriced, and they do have pretty deep rotation for in the tournament, which is a little bit disappointing. Considering, well, not disappointing, but most teams shore up their rotation a little bit during the tournament. But they really haven't, and that does make a lot of their players a little bit harder to utilize. But they do have some value up guys that are good secondary value plays that you can take a look at, but they are somewhat risky, and those being Key, Plavik, and Mashak even a little bit. So, don't love anybody but Vescovi there, but they all have some utility. As for FAU, they are the lowest scoring team on the slate, and they do have some overpriced plays here. But they do have some secondary value plays in Greenlee and also Gaffney, but they are somewhat risky due to the lack of minutes that they sometimes play. So that's a little bit of concern. This is also a slowest game on the slate, which is also a little bit of concern. And it's a little bit hard to really like anybody on this team at all. But I do think they have some secondary value plays if you want to take a shot in the dark. And obviously, if they were able to upset Tennessee, those value plays could be the difference in winning a GPP. As for UCLA and Gonzaga, UCLA is favored to win this game by 1 point. Now, they do have 2 players that are game time decisions, which are Bono and Singleton. Though they should be a high scoring team and a high scoring game, but it's a little bit hard to figure out considering the fact that they do have those guys that are questionable, and those injuries could make or break how you utilize their roster. With that said, Bailey and Campbell both have some secondary upside, and it's hard to ignore Jaquez here. But I don't know how these guys are going to play necessarily. It seems like kind of an up and air game in general with Gonzaga, just because these teams really haven't faced each other in a while, and that should be a high scoring game with not as much defense, even though UCLA is a pretty good defensive team. As for Gonzaga, they aren't favored to win the game, which is going to be a tough game for them, I think. I do think Timmy and Watson are underpriced if you think they can keep the game tight, but it's a little bit risky, especially if it gets out of hand or something like that. But Bolton Smith have some really good value upside here, but they are somewhat risky. So really, that last game definitely has a lot of risk. Sorry for butchering some of you guys' names, but anyhow, that's what I have for this slate. I think it's a very interesting slate. It's going to be somewhat difficult to really build a quality team just with the lack of really good value plays here, but there are some, and you could take some chances on some of these, mid 4,500 to 5,500 players because they have some viability and they have some upside. They're just a little bit risky because their floors tend to be pretty low. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.